So his doctor just asked us to come into a family room, and I'll never forget. There's certain things you don't forget in the journey of what I'd been through. Mine was the day I got told he was terminal.
Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
On today's episode, we wanted to explore a subject that me and Taj have heard quite a lot about because a lot of the community has spoken to us. Does that make sense? After other people have heard the podcast in regards to grief and loss, it's a subject that a lot of people are discussing with us. So we wanted to now look at another aspect, and that was what life is like after losing your partner. Now, in this week's episode, we have Rammi with us, and she unfortunately lost her husband. And we want to hear, what obviously happened, but also how her life was afterwards as well. So, Rammi, how are you today? Are you okay?
I'm well. Good evening, both.
Can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. So my name's Rammi Jamak. I was sadly widowed about 5 years ago. It's coming up to 5 years actually in June. In April. I always talk about June because that was my spouse's birthday, which is actually more of an anniversary for me. He passed away 5 years ago in April 2018. And I'm now 40 years old. I've moved on, not remarried, but I've got a new partner and a 2-year-old daughter with my new partner as well.
Okay, now we're going to have to go back because within a minute and a half we found out everything, and that doesn't work for our podcast. Okay, so in regards to your late husband, when did you get married to your late husband?
Gosh, that's going back some years. It was in 2009 that we got married.
Okay, and how long were you married for?
We were married nearly 9 years before he passed away, but I actually knew him about 5 years before, we got married. We met at university, went our separate ways, came back together after university, and got together in London, actually. We were both quite young, in our early 20s, I want to say. We were graduates working in London, and we didn't know many people our own age. Yeah. So we got together, we were friends first, and then got together and didn't date that long. Quite unusually. So my late husband was called Tyrone. He was of West Indian origin, and I'm Sikh Punjabi. So back then I was more like, oh my gosh, what will my parents say? I've fallen in love with somebody who's not from my cultural religion. But behold, it was my dad actually who said, look, it's time, you're dating this. He sounds like an amazing guy. I'd like to meet him. And they were just blown away as soon as they met him. He was just the most amazing young man, just very ambitious. And I think that just impressed my dad quite a lot.
Sounds like a catch. What did attract you to Tyrone in that case?
I think he was just so down to earth, really. He was so intelligent, but really humble with it. He always, when we used to talk about something like maths, he was a computer scientist. So when he talked about his subject, he always just thought everybody was on the same wavelength as him. And when he talked about really technical matters, he just assumed everyone got it straight away. And I think people just like to say otherwise.
I was going to say, so you were yawning, but you'd have to hide the yawns just because you were technically just as capable as.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so you got married a few years after meeting, which is a lovely way. I mean, you became friends and obviously got married. So you were married for how long did you say?
4.5 years. 4.5 years, approaching 5 before he was diagnosed.
Okay, and you said a bit earlier he was diagnosed with cancer. Can you talk us through your journey of finding out about the cancer first? What made him even go to the GP or doctor to find out about the diagnosis?
Yes, sure. No, I would like to talk about it because I think people ask me actually now if they're experiencing these symptoms. Oh my gosh, Rammi, is this what your husband had? And I want to say it's probably like nothing like anything that somebody has talked to me about. basically, up until that point, he'd never been sick, young, healthy male. The cliche as it sounds is going to work, doing the 9 to 5. Actually, he wasn't doing a 9 to 5. He was wrapping up his job in half a day and still doing really well.
Sounds very intelligent.
He was just so intelligent, and like he'd get a call in the evening, to log in to do some bit of whatever he did, programming. But
you still don't know what he does. Do you?
Honestly, I didn't know. All I knew, he worked for the Financial Times before he became sick, and he was developing something amazing for them, actually, one of their apps. And he'd never experienced headaches up until that point, like just normal, the ones that would go away with taking a paracetamol, having a glass of water or whatever. My grandmother had passed away that December 2018, and he was at the funeral. Indian Punjabi Sikh mourning period. It was very intense. I don't think he'd had many deaths in his family. I certainly hadn't. That was my first bereavement, actually. And we just thought, oh gosh, Tyron's really taken by this grief. He's just really, it's getting to him. He need to go lie down in a room. He said, I've got a headache and everything. My Massaji said, oh, Ty, do you want to get out? Let's go to the airport, do the airport run. We were having a lot of people coming from Toronto and all that. And he said he loved all that. He was Canadian by birth, actually, so there's a connection there. He loved my Canadian family. And,
that always helps.
Yeah, he's like, he would never say no to like a little road trip. So let's. It was only from Southall down to Heathrow, but still.
Hey, I don't live too far. I mean, to be fair, that's not much of a road trip.
Any opportunity to get in a car, even despite his headache that he was getting that evening. Like he got back in. This was after the funeral that we had guests coming, but it wasn't one he could shake off, I want to say, and it just got progressively worse over the next 24 hours.
So was that the first headache that he had, or he had them previously, but not as intense as this one that he was experiencing?
I can't say it's the first headache he ever had, but definitely the first notable one like this, that it was excruciatingly painful, that he was just vomiting with it and all sorts. Okay. We had to go down to Wrexham Hospital in Slough. We were living in Surrey, so we were not in our NHS area, whatever. So I took him in like an A&E, and still at that point you just think, you don't think anything, do you? You just think they're going to give him something. You don't even think he needs a scan. I didn't even think that's something that they would suggest, and they didn't actually. They did give him the strongest type of painkillers. I don't know what they're called. They're really, and they sent him home.
But what did they say that had happened? They just gave him the pain? Because look, we know what the NHS is like. When there's any pain, it's just like, take a paracetamol. Or did they think anything?
They gave him like codeine, that's the name. They gave him really strong codeine. They didn't, and he took it and it still wasn't. We'd left then and we went back to Surrey, and he still wasn't shaking this headache with the medication he's been given by the A&D at Slough. So this is where like his families kicked in, like especially his father and his mother. I mean, they just said this wasn't right. We all agreed, his brother, this wasn't right. We got him a private scan in Surrey. So which is what made us think this, that we should go and even do this.
So this was continuing on, and at that point you thought, okay, we need to investigate further. It isn't just a headache. We need to find out more.
Yeah. Within the 48 hours, I'd say. And his parents had Benetton health cover, so we got him through their health insurance, seen quite quickly at a hospital in Surrey, and they did a private scan. Immediately on that scan, this is still the first, I don't think it's 48 hours, I'm talking the first 3 days. So he did experience a headache for about 3 days. It was awful. And we basically got the results of the scan immediately, but then again, the radiographer was saying it was that bad, the scan. They shouldn't normally give a diagnosis, basically, based on what they'd seen.
So I mean, what did they see on the scan when you say it was that bad then?
Obviously, they're not specialists in what he had, so all they could spot from their expertise was what they called a grey mass on his brain. Okay. Yet they didn't want to diagnose. They obviously couldn't, but we were immediately the next. I mean, obviously being told that we've still been sent home, and then we have to go, have another night's sleep and wake up in the morning. I had to go to work. I just started a senior position within government, so I just got that job earlier in December. And I did have a very sympathetic workplace. But his brother, his mum and dad went to the hospital to get his results of the scan, as in what they thought the results were going to be. I then rushed to join them.
Rami, so when the doctor did actually say, look, there
Mm.
is a mass showing on the scan, how did you feel about it?
I still didn't know what it would be. I thought maybe we'd been on holiday. We'd always had loads of holidays, lovely exotic holidays. That's what we spent most of our mid-20s doing. I thought maybe we'd gone to Bali. So I thought maybe he'd got a tropical disease or something. I mean, I was just obviously kidding myself, but I was also quite naive as to
But unless you go through
condition.
something like this,
Mm.
I think it's always difficult. I mean, in regards to cancer, if anyone says any mass, that's the first thing you think, cancer,
I
what's that?
didn't actually. I
Oh,
didn't.
really?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you went to your work day. It was a new job. Could you carry on and function and work?
No, and there's
Your
the thing, I
mind.
suppose, subconsciously, I was like, something's not right. Obviously, it's not right, but it's serious. And the St George's Hospital, Tooting in South London, called us the next day, and his family were already there. I had to rush to get down there. And
What had they said on that phone call if his family were there?
yeah,
What is it that they'd said to say you need to get down
you
here?
need to, they said to his family, his wife needs to be here.
Okay.
Like, there's no, we're not doing this without her, basically.
So had they done another scan at that point? And obviously,
Yeah, they've done several.
okay.
And
Yeah.
did this give you alarm bells that okay, they're asking me to come
Yeah,
down?
totally.
Something
Totally.
serious.
Can't tell you how I ran off, in that kind of emergency setting. I just ran off on the tube. And you just can't get anywhere quick in London as well, can you? So it's just, I was in Victoria and he's in Surrey, South London. So I got there as quick as possible on the tube, and I vividly recall, like I can't remember too much about my journey, some things are blurred.
The blur, yeah, of course.
All I really remember is sitting in a chair with him next to me. He's also at this point, I think he's just so ill. So not digesting the information as such or what processing what's going on.
So was he still experiencing, because this is beyond the 48 hours, I'm assuming?
Yeah, he'd been given, he went to another hospital. He'd been given dexamethasone, a
Okay.
steroid, which isn't a miracle drug for nearly any cancer patient. It just reduces immediate symptoms. A lot of people have it prior to chemotherapy or post-surgery to reduce swelling.
Okay.
Essentially, his cancer was causing the swelling on the brain, which was causing the symptoms. The cancer couldn't be reduced or treated with the steroids, but the symptoms can be managed. So his swelling had come down, and therefore his headache had disappeared.
Okay.
But he's now on these steroids, which he kind of went through the course of his battle with cancer, actually.
So at this point, when you're sitting in front of your consultant, both of you are obviously in a panic. There's obviously something going on. Do you remember what the consultant says? Because like you said, it's usually a blur.
No, to me, it's not. The words
Okay.
aren't a blur. He said, we've looked at the scans that you've had privately. We've done some scans here. Tyrone's got what we call a low-grade astrocytoma. It's a form of brain tumor. Did not use the word cancer.
Okay.
Many people don't with brain tumors. You hear the word brain tumors, different grades, but you never really hear brain cancer. So I still didn't know it was cancer. Still quite naive to the fact that, and even at that point, parents who were from medical backgrounds, actually, his mum and dad, they still didn't.
Do you think if you had heard the word cancer, then it would have been like, oh my God?
Yeah.
No.
They
It's like the trigger word almost.
They didn't say it intentionally.
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't say it on purpose. They called it exactly by its medical name.
Because you're like, huh? Okay.
Yeah. And they called it benign as well at that point.
Okay. So they've said benign. I can't even remember because you've used the medical term.
Yeah.
So at this point, you're still a bit clueless as to what this is and what's the next. No.
I'm clueless as to. I want to say to you, ladies, that actually it wasn't a battle with cancer for me. It was a battle with a brain tumor for 3 years. That's what Tyrone had. He had 3 craniotomies, brain surgeries. And even then, every time we thought he's coming back from a major treatment, and he will beat this. It was never a case of me thinking it's cancer until maybe the last 18 months when I'm thinking, wait, he's on, when they recommended radiotherapy, basically.
Okay.
Every time he was where they're still being able to operate, and he had 3 brain surgeries.
Do you think they still kept that word cancer away from things, just again not to alarm you? Or was it just because they were just using the right terminology?
I think it's a very complicated cancer. I think they don't know much about it. We still don't know much about brain tumors, and I think they were calling it to the best of their terminology, and I think they didn't believe it was the most aggressive kind at that stage. That's why they weren't using the word cancer.
Okay, so when you found out the diagnosis, and it obviously been called a tumor, it's probably sunk in slightly, what's going on.
Mm.
Have they actually said it is treatable?
Yes,
Or oh, right, okay.
yes, yes.
So
Right.
you're still optimistic at this point?
Oh, definitely. The first year was complete optimism.
Well, it
And
would be.
positive people. Like
Yeah,
he was so positive. We hear this a lot, but he was like warrior mode, and he was like, oh, like, and especially as the first surgery went so well, and he came back with this kind of new lease of life. Because remember, before that point, he was ill. After surgery, he was better. So
Mm.
we thought, well, okay, the surgery's worked. They've removed the brain tumor. We asked, did you remove it? They said, we've removed 90% of the tumor.
which sounds like quite a lot.
And at the time, I thought, okay, because and then I said, how many years has it been there? I asked all these questions. They said over 14 years, maybe. We can't be sure. So I thought, okay, well, he's maybe got, say, even that 10%, whatever's left, maybe even if it's going to grow, it's still going to take another 20 years because that's how long he's been, he's been here for over 30 years. So it could be slowly growing.
Yeah, because logically, yeah, you would think like that. Yeah.
But what we didn't know is that cancers change, they get metasized, and you don't want to leave even 1% of cancer behind anyway, especially in the brain.
So just out of interest, so what is it? Why did they leave the 10%?
They just couldn't treat,
They
they
couldn't touch
couldn't
that.
they couldn't be sure even of the 90%. I think they said to me afterwards, it's an estimation, and it's things that people say. There's a lovely storyline, or not so lovely, but a very realistic storyline in EastEnders at the moment with it, very similar terminology, because this is just what doctors do. It's not to criticize the medical profession, but they just try to keep you optimistic. It's not misleading. It's just to do with their best knowledge, and it's always about the patient. It's not
But
even about me
yeah,
or his family.
yeah, it's like half the battle is to keep positive.
Yeah,
And maybe that's the way that they're going about it, just keeping you positive that there's still a battle we can fight. Whereas
yeah.
if it's no, we can't do anything about it, everyone gives up, and so does the patient. So
Mm.
it's almost doing that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's why they do it. They want you to be in your best mindset to tackle it. They don't want you to come defeatist to a surgery or any type of treatment, because if you can't if you can't overcome surgery and recover from it, then they're not going to treat you. I mean, that's the thing. That's why, because he was quite young, he had a lot on his side. He was fit in every other sense of the word. So in a way, when he had a major surgery, he's more likely to recover than you are if you're in your 60s or 70s
Yeah.
from the type of surgery he had. So we thought surgery would be enough.
Okay, so at this point, he's had the surgery. You're optimistic.
Yes.
It's obviously spread. So at what point between that first surgery to then going back and saying something's still not right here? How long did that take?
9 months, and he had more headaches.
And had it grown again
Yeah,
within the brain?
another scan.
Yeah.
We have regular scans. We came to fear them with some type of dread, because anxiety is a word that a lot of people use. Ty's still quite optimistic, but I'm reading more now on the subject.
Google
And that's
sometimes isn't your best friend.
Yeah, I've had that 9 months where he's thinking about recovery, he's thinking about alternative medicines and this and that. I'm thinking of, I'm just at work in quite a horrendous job, to be honest. And Dr. Google takes over, but not even Dr. Google. I go beyond that. I mean, I'm contacting oncologists in Chicago, Miami, Switzerland, India. Like I want to know what this is about, what it's called, what's the worst case scenario, and I get all my information. And I'm not presenting it to him, but I kind of know what's coming, so I want to know what's next as well.
See, this is really interesting because, okay, aside from Dr. Google, because we're not fans of Dr. Google anyway, besides some consultants still using it, um, we, I actually went through a very similar experience where someone that my aunt went through cancer, and I went to a Facebook group, and again, it was a very rare cancer, and there was a nurse on there. And to be fair, in her case, it was a case of, look, you need to understand, this is it. There is no treatment for it. And at that point, so it's a good idea to do your research. Sometimes it is a bit scary hearing the other results, but at least there is something that you can do. You feel like you're doing something.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, we use the word optimist or pessimist, and I think I just fall somewhere in the middle of being a pragmatist.
Yeah.
And I needed to prepare myself, probably even more than him. And so what I read came to fruition, and basically he did need further surgery, but this time was the first time they said after surgery he'll need to go for immediate radiotherapy.
Okay.
So I'm like, is it cancer now? They said, we think it's become more aggressive. They're still not using the word, but now I don't really need them to use that word. I kind of...
Even sorry, Ted, I'm pretty sure you're going to say the same thing, but even when it was benign, it's still called a cancer. It's just a benign cancer, isn't it?
It's benign cancer, yes.
I was going to backtrack and say, you've done all this research and you said you didn't share it with him?
No, not at that point. He's getting ill again. So
yeah, you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, no.
Did you feel that was a lonely journey? Because you're doing all this research, you're finding out things, and you're not sharing it with anyone. Did it feel lonely for you?
Yes, yeah. I think I can only see this more 5 years on now, how incredibly isolating and lonely it was. I had amazing friends and support network. I always used to say, Ty's friends became my friends, and he was popular actually, and so therefore I was popular by default.
That's always nice.
And it was really, those people rallied around and they helped me. We still did all our regular stuff that couples do, but we always just had the cancer there as well, and the battle, and a 3-year battle. So after radiotherapy, after his second surgery, the NHS wanted to do radiotherapy, the oncology team at the Royal Marsden, but this is where a lot of the South Asian widow story might come into it, or the South Asian experience, because right now I'm giving you the cancer story and the cancer experience, which might resonate with any of your listeners who know somebody with cancer or are battling it. But the South Asian element comes in, like the tensions are building with the in-laws. And again, it might not be a South Asian element. It could be.
No, tell us.
It feels uniquely more heightened.
So yeah, the South Asian element, you said. So what was happening with the in-laws? What was happening? What was going on?
I think disagreement about treatment, essentially. Conflict of opinion. All very intelligent human beings.
Yeah.
What's more is love the same person.
What was the difference? Because you're all after the same thing. What was the difference in your differing opinions?
I trusted the NHS, I suppose. I wanted to keep him within a system that at least I could be in control, understand a bit more. They wanted more, go abroad or something like that, which I just felt very nervous about.
Can I just ask, when you said, the South Asian element, what do you mean as South Asian? Because I'm trying to understand. To be fair, I think we've had those conversations where it's like, well, someone says go away, and so what do you mean?
That he's our son. We brought him into the world. We are his mum and dad. We know best. You're just his wife. How can you understand? You don't even have children. Again, it could be non-South Asian, but there feels something uniquely within our. And he wasn't even Punjabi, but they were still of Indian origin, and so it feels like a uniquely kind of. It's like magnified. I feel those issues that you might have in any cultures, but in ours, other things are brought into it. Like,
was it actually said he's our son, so basically we get to? So it was said, okay.
And he trusts us more. Even he would trust. We're his mum and dad. Like, what do you mean? Like, we don't know best. Are you saying that we'd want to hurt him?
What was Tyrone's opinion when that was being said in that case?
I think he trusted. It felt like he trusted them more, but he was also desperate. And I also feel like he was their son, so he's brought up with the same cultural norms as them. And one of the things, really big things that they were arguing about was radiotherapy will give him some type of disability. And Ty had always said to me, I can cope with this cancer so long as I don't look ill. so long as I don't have like, for me, it was absurd what he was saying. It was like, as long as I don't lose mobility. I say you live for the rest of your life without use of your legs, I wouldn't mind. And he's like, nah, kill me. He's going to shoot me if I end up in a wheelchair. That's what he used to say to me.
Do you think this is an element of what will people say?
Yeah.
And that's why he was thinking more visually, oh, I don't want people to think that I'm ill. I
So
don't know. I
man,
don't mean to put words in your mouth, but do you
A
think
man thing.
it might be a man thing, but I think again it's to do with how his upbringing.
Okay.
And for me and my family, we didn't feel that as much. We're just like, your survival is the most important thing. In the end, that they won, and he went for a private treatment in Switzerland called proton beam.
But do
Very
you
specialist.
can I just ask? Earlier, you said that his family were from a medical background. Is that correct? Or did
Yeah,
I?
yeah. They
So,
were.
do you think rather than, and I don't know, you were in the situation. Do you think rather than it being a South Asian issue and a difference in culture, it was more the fact that they were from a medical background, in which case they had more clout about the subject?
Not when they're arguing with the most senior of surgeons and doctors and oncologists, and they were nurses. So I just think they didn't have the expertise really for his condition. If anything, up to that point, I'd read more, I'd researched more, I'd spoken to more specialists. But I think that the kind of emotional blackmail won out, and I felt very hands tied over the situation. And I didn't want to cause Tyrone any more stress or anxiety. So I came on board to their way of thinking and overall, like, kind of made it work, because if I wasn't on board, then no, I wasn't going to leave him to go alone. I still had to stay at home to pay the bills and do all of that and the mortgage and everything. But he went to Switzerland for 6 weeks and he had the treatment, came back. That after that treatment to his next kind of treatment, it was the longest gap, nearly 18 months of being very well, very healthy.
Okay, so in that case, do you think
And then their parents were like, "Yay, we were right."
that's what I was just about to say? Do you think then retrospectively, then perhaps it was a good decision? Although we don't have to admit that because
I don't know. I don't know, right? Did it give him a better quality of life for a longer period? Maybe. I don't know what radiotherapy would have done. I can't compare because he didn't go for radiotherapy, but I've heard awful stories about radiotherapy. But also, I don't think proton beam is effective or was effective on his type of cancer. It works very well on childhood cancers. And from what I'd read, it just wasn't going to get the majority of the cancer. That's why he didn't have a disability or something, because it left too much of it behind.
Okay, so he's got back from Switzerland. It's been okay for 18 months, and then I'm assuming he's having
Yeah,
headaches
the
again.
third time, a seizure. He'd had a seizure, which was another symptom, which apparently he'd had one when I'd not been around. So this was maybe his second major seizure, but the first time I wasn't there, my parents were out to dinner with him actually. And
Okay.
there's so many conflicts here because my mum and dad, who I trust implicitly with all my heart, said he had a major seizure in an Indian restaurant and a doctor was there, had to help him.
Yeah.
His parents, who weren't there, were just so annoyed, and my parents were calling it the word seizure. They were obsessed with labels and how their son might be perceived, because he had an amazing job and he was a professional and he was their golden gifted child. I mean, out of the three, he was the youngest who'd got into Cambridge University, and like for them, it was just, they could not believe he was the illness. They couldn't see the illness. They didn't want to see it. So the cancer in the head, hidden. But as soon as they start witnessing things, that's hard. They never saw a seizure and stuff. So
Yeah, it might have been, as a parent, you want to see your child perfect and you can't even if there is something wrong, you don't want to admit it to yourself.
It's denial. Yeah.
Denial, that's the
But
word.
then this is the thing. I think we've had these conversations about different things. Alcohol just came up in my head, or we have breast cancer, and that is something very similar with what we've heard previously on other podcasts. We are okay until someone else sees it, and then the community sees it, and that's where the issue is. And obviously, unfortunately, that's happened again in this case, where it's caused
I
such
think
conflict.
so. And it caused so much more stress than just dealing with, like, even as if the cancer wasn't stressful enough, right? The other family arguments and stuff. But in the end, it's just like, okay, then it wasn't a seizure. If that makes you feel better, like it just fell off his chair or whatever you want to call it. But for me, I just needed things addressed, labelled, so we could move on and deal with it.
Do you feel you were backing down quite a lot? Like
Yeah.
they were saying something and you were like, okay, I can't be bothered with this fight. Let's just do it your way. Let's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ultimately, I don't think it made much difference, though, those battles that we went through, those arguments.
But it's interesting because aside from this being the issue, as a woman that has got married into whatever household, whatever culture within the South Asian community, that is very common though, isn't it? Where women do tend to back down. It's like, okay, can I be bothered with this battle? It's all about the war at the end, but I'm not gonna have this battle because it's not worth it,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah,
So
I think about my character, what type of person, and I think the experience changed me, and I became that way,
yeah.
back down. But initially, being like the eldest daughter in a Punjabi family, I was treated like the firstborn. It didn't matter if I was a girl. What am I? I was put on a pedestal, and I was always right. But then this experience really taught me to be like, gosh, like know your place, and don't you argue with your in-laws, don't speak up. So it changed me from my natural state of the way actually I'd been raised, actually. And it's funny to think I became that way through this experience rather than through my upbringing. So that's something I think about a lot.
But this is such a common story where you go into a relationship, like you get married and everything, and your personality, you turn into something that you don't recognize because of the situation.
But I think this is it. I mean, you were in a very extreme situation. When it's anything medical, especially when it is something like cancer, it's the pressure does build on everybody in the situation.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
okay,
and I have a lot of sympathy now looking back. But at the time, I think I was internalizing it and just I was getting bitter and twisted about it, but I still wasn't vocalizing my feelings towards them. But I was like, oh, you're just, subconscious as I can't, in my mind, was like, I can't wait to take Tyre away from you. And just, but it was, yeah, that wasn't to be anyway.
okay. So the cancer has unfortunately come back after another 18 months. How long did you have with Tyrone after this then?
Just another, that was October, November, and it was another 6-7 months or so at that point. So he had his third surgery, and then they suggested chemotherapy. He had one course of chemotherapy, 3 lines of chemotherapy, they call it, which is never good if your first or second's not working and they have to go to a third type. But even in that period, I still took him to India to get a second, third opinion.
A lot,
Credit to you.
but
Yeah,
again, as a lot of people do. I mean, India, despite how, the Western world looks at India, a lot of people do go back to India to get that second opinion.
and I had amazing oncologist who basically, first time he saw Ty, he's like, he's got hope, he's got a chance. But he saw him for the second time, and I could just tell he's really deteriorated.
Okay.
So much to little things, his memory, his speech, just the way he was behaving. I could see it as well when we came back from India. Even though he was on chemo out there and back, he wasn't the same man. I think before my eyes, I suddenly saw a shift. Whereas maybe it was happening gradually, but for me, it became very visibly. Little things. He was great at DIY, and he was messing things up, and numbers was his thing, and he couldn't do them anymore. And so it was just really, really sad.
Do you know what? I think that's at that point. I remember having a very similar experience, and it was You had a number of months, but when I went through that experience with my aunt, you're like, actually, I think this is it, and the penny drops, unfortunately,
Yeah,
and you're like, oh my god. I mean, I know you had said it, but oh my god.
Yeah, it was 6 or 7 months before his passing, and it was like, I understand. I've had therapy, so I understand a little bit about what I was going through then, 7 months before his passing, maybe even a year before his passing, right? Something called anticipatory grief.
Mm-hmm.
I'd started grieving basically for my marriage, for the relationship we'd had, for what was possible, for what we might have had, which was a sadder realization for me at that point. And I just couldn't talk to him anymore anyway. Like,
He wasn't the same person.
no.
Yeah.
Was he, how do you mean he wasn't the same person? As in he didn't want to talk about it, or his body was shutting down? Because the body is an amazing thing as well.
His body was actually really good. His physical abilities were quite good up until even during the chemo, but mind-wise, intellectual ability, like he was all about his intelligence, his speech was deteriorating. Just things that you might. I think the closest I can call it is similar to like a dementia patient, I suppose. It's just really tragic to see in a young man, and but still, going for it, still going and still going to dinners and things like that with friends, but sitting there with like this kind of glazed look. He wasn't well. And that was sad. He couldn't join in conversations. I know he sometimes had loads to say. Yeah.
How, so you were obviously internalizing a lot of your emotions at this point as well. Then did you talk to anyone about the grief that you're going through?
There was a little community of other ladies and some blokes whose partners had brain tumours, but nobody was going through it at this point to the level I was, the same level of decline, because everyone's journey is slightly different. So I felt not at, no, I didn't really have anybody to talk to. Her friends were amazing, but it was all about Ty still. Yeah, it was all about like, how's he doing? When they check in, hundreds of WhatsApps, never a shortage. But some friends would say, "And how are you doing?" Like that was something that shook me, and it was amazing they asked that, because then I would be like, "No." Like I didn't even talk about myself. I would just kept saying about his well-being, and then the end is a very kind of, for me, I don't mind talking about it, because I think a lot of people don't talk about that part of the cancer journey, and it is part of the journey. It's the end. And after there's a lot as well. But as far as my widow story goes, I think it's really important that I do, because people shy away from death, and we don't talk about death enough in our community. It's another taboo. And for me, the death was, even though he had, I shouldn't have been shocked because of everything I'd just spoken about. But there was this one devastating day, I'd call it. It was in March, 10th of March, and I'll never forget, it's my little brother's birthday. And Ty had an episode from hell that he'd never had. All the symptoms I've talked about for 3 years all came to their head in this one day. He had anger, kind of outrage. He'd had an excruciating headache, sickness, everything in the early hours of the morning. And I was just shocked. I was a bit scared of his anger. Even to that point, he was still in control, because he locked himself in the bathroom ensuite because he knew he couldn't control what was going on. And I think it was all pain. And then, I think he at that point, I called his parents. And that's the thing, that's the control, that's what I want to say as well. I didn't call A&D, I didn't call 999, I called his dad. Like, what do I do? And his dad did say, take him to A&D. We did, we went to the local Surrey hospital. Again, they gave him steroids, but it wasn't the same this time.
Sorry, okay, so just so I understand, the anger, this would have been a symptom of the medication and the cancer, or do you think it was the frustration? It sounds like it was.
It's probably the cancer overall impacting a part of the brain that just hadn't been impacted, because everything's controlled by the brain, isn't it? Your emotions, just everything.
Why did you decide to phone his parents then rather than
I was scared. And I think I was like, there must have been an element of trust still.
Sometimes you just need someone to guide you, because you just don't want to make that, or you can't, you're not in the headspace to make that decision.
Yeah, and I think subconsciously I didn't want to do anything wrong. Yeah. So
what do you think you would have done wrong if you had phoned A&E, for example?
It's what I did anyway. But silly, there's nothing I could have done that would have been any different to the outcome. But I think in that moment, they'd always said to me, call us. So that's what I did. Yeah. But the strongest decision I'd made for the first time in 3 years, I feel, was either I took him out of A&D and I took him to the Royal Marsden, where he had the most brilliant oncology team. And they never blew light a patient from A&D to a cancer hospital, because that's not how you enter a cancer hospital. You'd normally just be an inpatient, get treatment. They saw, his oncologist got paged. He was there immediately, and they start, dealing with the symptoms. And it was really hard. Like an amazing German doctor who the next morning, they'd got his symptoms under control. By this point, he wasn't speaking at all. He wasn't moved. He was bedbound. I think he could sit in a wheelchair, but he was more or less bedbound. But he had no tubes or anything like that. You hear with other cancers. He had none of that.
Remy, how old were you, and how old was he at this point?
Ty was 35. I was 34.
Okay, so very young. Okay.
Yeah, they're quite incredibly naive as to even like the end of life stuff.
Well, it's one of those things, like you said, we just don't talk about it in our community, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? In this case, where you don't know
You're
what
just
to do
not
next.
equipped. You couldn't have been emotionally, mentally equipped whatsoever unless you'd gone through this or been through this. I hadn't even really seen it with my grandmother. Like my mom and dad went to hospital, and even then it was quite, slow. She had dementia, and then she passed away with an infection. Like we were young, we were shielded from death, right? We saw the funeral and all of that, but we hadn't seen someone dying in front of our eyes.
But again, that's an interesting point. I mean, we had this conversation. We were shielded from it. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Because we know that our parents did it for our best. They thought, let's bubble wrap them. They don't need to see this stuff. But do you think that is a good decision? Just your opinion on the way
My
salvation.
opinion is that we protect the young, don't we? And that's for a reason. Because why? They're innocent, and there's a naivety with being young, and we should protect them, but there should be an honest discussion around death, so that, God forbid, the worst happens, that they are somewhat equipped to deal with it. Because I think sadly it's a reality of life. And the more we sugarcoat it, or the more we hide it, and the more we treat it like a taboo, the less emotionally, mentally equipped you are to deal with it when it happens. So when my daughter's old enough, I certainly will be having those discussions. But yeah, there's a point you've got to choose those points. I mean, they can be pure in biological terms, right? Like, this is the reality, this is what happens. But I think it's got to go beyond that. It's got to be about, this is what you might feel. This is what grief feels like. It looks different for maybe everybody, but these are some of the emotions. And by the way, they're normal. Yeah. Normalizing it.
Okay, so what happened now? He's not talking. He's pretty much bedbound.
Yeah. So his doctor just asked us to come into a family room. And I'll never forget, there's certain things you don't forget in the journey of what I'd been through. Mine was the day I got told he was terminal, and walking down a corridor, and the doctor turns and looks only at me, straight at me, is, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Before we reach the family room, his family are a few paces behind me. I was like, well, I didn't know actually until.
Oh God, but you broke it, yeah.
And it's their way. It's their way. That he must have had countless conversations similarly to that. And I think it's actually quite tactful. It's preparing me a little bit, but tiny millisecond before
You entered, yeah.
But
before
then,
the rest.
but then now looking back at it, do you appreciate the fact that he looked at you and said,
Yeah, I do. Because at that point, I felt validated for being like the closest person to him, which I hadn't really experienced throughout the previous 3 years. And people were like, you're the only one that in this moment is, you're his next of kin. You are the closest person to him. And Ty and I had never spoken about this point because it was all just sudden at the end. And then his mental capability had changed, right? So we weren't having the worst case situation type conversations that I know some spouses have with their terminal, other half. We just didn't have that conversation.
What was the reaction in that room when the doctor did say, right, okay, there's nothing else we can do? Because so it was you in the room and his parents in the room,
And my mum and dad and his brother.
Okay.
And sister-in-law, so his brother's wife.
Okay, so what were the reaction for the people in the room then?
Just so varied. But mum and dad, my parents went quiet. His mum screamed, just an instant, it's horrible, like gut-wrenchingly kind of primal scream that a mother, I imagine, would have.
okay, so his mum's obviously had this reaction. How are you feeling at this point?
I think it's just, well, what happens now? This is just how does that happen, what you're saying? Because you're saying it's terminal. So a few questions. I think actually my sister-in-law asked somebody sensible um, how long, and I think they said 5 weeks. If yeah, 5 weeks. Yeah,
Oh
no,
wow,
no, no. They said 3 weeks. Ty survived 5 weeks. Yeah,
wow, just 3 weeks they said.
yeah, yeah.
And from that, what was it? Was it like, did it feel it was countdown now? Because
I mean,
when
yeah, it really
when you're
did, right?
yeah,
But the tension of the in-laws was just unbearable at this point because I was saying that stuff and they were just couldn't. They hadn't like gone to the next stage because they were absolutely in denial.
But
so
then, okay, so this is really interesting because obviously you're at loggerheads and it's again very high pressurized situation, but there's that hope. Is their
They always
child?
had it. Yeah, they had that. Yeah, and only now I've become a mother, I can imagine having it. It's just really hard for a spouse,
Yeah.
really hard. And I don't, because I've spoken to many widows now. More often than not, spouses are not in denial.
okay.
Okay.
Why is that the case? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Is it because we're younger that we just? I don't know.
Okay.
Reality, you're going to have to deal with this afterwards. It's your life. I mean, I don't know. I'm putting
It
putting it.
might just be. It might be that loving a child is just so different. So therefore, that's how you are. You're optimistic. It's not a greater love. It's a different love, and it doesn't mean because you don't believe that. It doesn't mean just because I'm a realist, I get it. I've accepted that diagnosis, and they haven't. It doesn't mean they loved him more or I loved him more. It's just we were different in our reactions
Mm.
because we'd come from different places. And that's why maybe titles don't even matter. But I imagine you cling on to every glimmer of hope. But I mean, the hope they were clinging on to is just could they have longer? I think they'd accepted terminal, but just
Yeah.
no way it could be 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you at loggerheads in that case because of the South Asian element, or was it the fact that they were parents and you were his spouse? What was the loggerhead? What was the issue
Probably
there?
more parents and spouse aspect. I think the South Asian thing is probably more to do with more what cultural things that should happen, but that probably is after his passing,
Okay.
funeral arrangements and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So how were the 3 weeks? Well, the 5 weeks because he survived the five
Yeah,
weeks.
I mean, it was awful, but they asked, did he want to be in the hospice or at home? Um, and I chose home. And there's a lot of decisions falling on me at this point. And it was hard. We just bought our forever home 3 or 4 years before, and Ty was doing it up, and we were getting renovations, and we suddenly had to turn the downstairs dining room, which I always remember looking at the room and thinking he'd just done that DIY bit and that DIY bit, and we turned it into his room to die in, and it was like his friends. But in that kind of more, what sounds morbid, we made it as beautiful as it could be. The process, the healing of it, like he was a massive Bob Marley fan, so
Yeah.
we made sure the music was playing, posters. He was into his hip hop, and like we just made it homely,
Yeah.
and that's why we wanted to bring him home.
Okay.
It was devastating. So like I would be like that around him, or at least his family, and in that room, positive as possible. But yeah, I'd cry non-stop in another room and just in my mum's arms mostly.
And was it your parents that you tended to do
Yeah,
that with?
yeah. Like in the end, his parents didn't come and see him much. In the end,
Oh,
it
oh,
was
really?
yeah.
Wow.
They couldn't face it. His sister-in-law came a lot, and his sister, who he'd actually been estranged from for many years, um, because of his parents, but they obviously had reconciled and they wanted her there. I think it's the whole female. At least she was somebody close to him because they couldn't deal with it
But yeah, we have to respect that everyone handles things in
so
different ways, and
differently.
they just couldn't cope with it.
No,
And they were looking after their mental health, and
But
yeah,
how did that make you feel? Because you are the one that is there day in, day out.
I
But
think
what's going through your head then?
for me, it's just for me at this point. I think I'm just thinking there's a little bit of panic setting in. Like I just don't, I'm just thinking, gosh, what happens after? Because now I know it's happening. What will happen to me? All the scenarios of like my life's just doomed, and all this is where definitely the South Asian element kicks in, because I just don't know a good widow story. And I just don't know. Like, all I know is my kind of, no, I didn't even know grandparents at this point, but whatever you saw on the TV and, you know, in mourning for the rest of your life kind of scenario, just, I never knew there would be a life for me. I just thought, he dies, I die. Like, what?
like fairy tales, isn't it?
Like, I didn't.
End together, you start together. Yeah.
I was so consumed by his cancer, his treatment, his healing, his from surgeries and treatments. I wasn't imagining any life after loss. That's the reality of it. Like, I just didn't picture it. Like, when people tell me, but you must have thought, how would you do? No, I wasn't even thinking up to the funeral. I wasn't even planning his funeral. I
It
didn't
was like
even know what happened when someone dies. I didn't even know at that point. I could have asked the questions, but I didn't want to. Nobody wanted to tell me, I guess. How does a body leave the house? I didn't know. Like, the reality of it.
So can you talk us through that? Because you've said yourself, no one talks you through it, and that might be something that's really important in this podcast if someone else is going through this.
Yeah. To bear in mind, everybody's end of life journey is different. Although, you know, it's sad and it's touching how similar it can be as well when I talk to other people who experience the same feelings. For us, it happened. So 3 weeks had gone. He was definitely deteriorating. Nil by mouth. He, you know, wasn't able to go to the toilet. He just couldn't move. He was completely bedbound. Eyes were quite alert right until the end. I always remember that. He was always very looking around what's going on. But I still don't think he had much, which fills me with some pieces that I don't actually think he knew how ill he was at the end. Definitely. So, you know, he was reciting or humming music quite a lot. I remember that a lot. But the end came when don't think I was sleeping. I don't think I slept. I don't remember sleeping a good night's sleep in those 5 weeks, right? But I must have drifted off in the early hours. And my cousin, his sister, my mum, my brother, and a carer were the ones there. And they rushed me from me being sleeping in our bed upstairs. They're like, now. It's now. I'm like, okay. And I must not have been around for the kind of, it's amazing. I think it's a carer. I don't know who really made this decision to call me right at the end, or it's in God's hands, because I literally only witnessed his last breath.
Okay. So just so the listeners know, we did have to take a bit of a pause because, me and Taj are usually an emotional wreck at the best of times, so we're not very good with the subjects like this. But Rammi, talk us through what happened next. Obviously, Tyrone has passed. You've witnessed his last breath. How was the funeral? How were you at this point?
I think I was just a zombie. Like, I think I was, you know, just totally going through the motions robotically. Everybody else just took over, thank God. My brother, his sister-in-law, I didn't recall making a single decision.
But we thank God for families, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the best. Like, oh God, they're annoying, but when you need them, they're there.
Yeah, it all kicked in at that point. Mum, dad, my brother was just incredible, and he was 6 years younger than me. So the things he did, you know, I don't think we gave him so when I say there's some tensions, you know, between his family and I think I gave him a Hindu funeral. Ty was of Hindu birth. It was mostly a modern young service, like amazing friends from all his jobs, speeches.
A bit of Bob Marley.
Definitely a lot of Bob Marley. Eulogies, West Indian cricket flags, whatever, the whole works like that.
Okay, but his mum and dad were obviously at the funeral,
yeah.
And
we didn't talk. It was at this point, I think it was very separate.
Why did you not talk? Because you've both gone through the same thing. Obviously, the tensions were there. Why didn't you talk at this point?
I think I was so consumed by my grief, and they were. they had people supporting them. I had people supporting me. I don't think we supported each other, but we also didn't have that type of relationship where we needed to be the ones doing that. It would have been nice, I suppose, but it was just, I didn't need them, and I don't think they needed me. I don't think it was much. I think at this point we'd probably just burnt bridges, but there was no real, there was no anger. I wasn't sensing that. There was just a lot of grief.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.